30 seconds. That is all it took. In the grand theater of history, empires have fallen in days, and kingdoms have been lost in hours. But for Meghan Markle, the collapse of a carefully constructed facade required only 30 seconds of digital arrogance. It was a spring morning in April when a post appeared on her Instagram stories. To the casual observer, it looked like a standard diplomatic gesture, a letter of gratitude from the Vice President of Ukraine. It was nice, harmless, perhaps even noble. But for those who reside behind the stone walls of the palace, those who understand the ironclad weight of a royal decree, that post was not a gesture. It was a declaration of war. The letter sat there, unedited and glowing on the screens of millions of followers. And there, at the very top, were the two words that changed everything: Your Royal Highness. To you, it might seem like a mere formality. After all, she is married to a prince. But in the world of the British monarchy, words are the currency of power, and titles are the property of the crown. By hitting upload on a document that addressed her as such, Meghan Markle did more than just share a thank you note. She effectively torched a legal agreement that had been the only thing keeping her brand afloat. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must go back to the winter of 2020. At the Sandringham Summit, a meeting of high stakes and heavy hearts, a deal was struck between a grandmother and her grandson. The terms were absolute. The late Queen Elizabeth II was clear. If they chose to walk away from the burdens of service, they would also walk away from the perks of the style. The agreement, which remains hosted on the official royal website even today, stated that they would no longer use their HRH titles. Not in public, not for profit, not at all. It was a gentleman's agreement signed with the ink of 1,000 years of tradition. For 5 years, the world watched as they danced on the edge of that agreement. But in April, the dance ended. A source close to the future king, Prince William, did not mince words when speaking to the press. They stated quite simply that one would have to be an idiot to believe she did not know exactly what she was doing. This was not a mistake made by a social media manager. This was a calculated move by a woman who understands the power of a brand. She knew that without those 3 letters, H, R, and H, she is just another celebrity in a sea of influencers. She needed that title to validate her commercial existence. But in reaching for it, she handed her enemies the very weapon they needed to finish what started at Sandringham. This is where the story shifts. This is no longer about palace gossip or who made whom cry at a bridesmaid fitting. We are moving past the realm of hurt feelings and family feuds into the cold, hard reality of contracts and legal terminations. For years, the public has wondered if Parliament would ever find the political will to strip their titles. We waited for debates, for votes, for royal proclamations that never seemed to come. But while we were looking at the front door, the back door was being slammed shut. The industry has already delivered its verdict. Think about the numbers, and I want you to hear them clearly. The $100 million deal with Netflix? Terminated. The multi-million-dollar partnership with Spotify? Ended with a public execution of their reputation, labeled as frauds by the very executives who once courted them. The $20 million book deal? Expired and buried. These are not coincidences. This is the sound of a vacuum being created. The Instagram post in April was a desperate attempt to fill that vacuum. It was a signal to the world that she still possessed the royal magic, the Your Royal Highness status that opens doors and signs checks. But instead of saving her, it served as the ultimate proof of breach. A source close to William has confirmed that a way will now be found to remove the titles permanently, not if, but when. When the title of Duchess is stripped, the fallout will be total. Unlike her husband, Meghan was not born into this bloodline. Her status is a courtesy, a gift of marriage that can be revoked as easily as it was granted. Without it, she does not become a simpler version of a royal. She becomes Meghan Mountbatten, Windsor, a name that, quite frankly, does not sell jam, does not secure production deals, and does not command the attention of world leaders. As we peel back the layers of this digital scandal, we see a pattern emerging, a pattern of hubris that stretches back long before the royal wedding. This is the story of a woman who thought she could outmaneuver a 1,000-year-old institution with a smartphone and a PR team. But as the sun sets on her commercial empire, she is finding out that the crown does not negotiate. It waits. And in that 30-second Instagram post, the wait finally ended. Let us build the case for why this was the beginning of the end. When the red carpet is rolled up and the camera flashes fade, Hollywood is not a land of fairy tales. It is a cold, calculated machine that runs on a single fuel: return on investment. For a brief, shining moment, Meghan Markle was the most sought-after commodity in the entertainment capital of the world. She arrived with a prince on her arm and a duchess title that promised unprecedented access to the most exclusive inner sanctum on earth. But by the spring of 2026, the industry that once bowed at her feet delivered a verdict so brutal, so public, and so final that it effectively ended her career as a global power player. They did not just stop working with her. They evicted her from the ranks of the elite with a label that is impossible to wash off: frauds. Let us look at the wreckage of the empire. We begin with the most public execution of a reputation in recent memory. Spotify, the audio giant that handed the Sussexes a multi-million-dollar contract, did not let them go with a polite press release about creative differences. No, their own executive, a man deeply embedded in the hierarchy of the industry, went on the record to call them grifters and frauds. Consider the math, because the math does not lie. They were paid a king's ransom for a multi-year deal, and in 3 years they delivered exactly 12 episodes of a single podcast, one season. That is not a creative struggle. That is a commercial failure of epic proportions. When you are paid tens of millions of dollars to speak, and you have nothing to say that people want to hear after 12 hours of audio, the industry notices. The label fraud was not just an insult. It was a professional autopsy. Then came the crown jewel of their commercial operation, Netflix. In 2020, the world stood still when it was announced that the Sussexes had signed a deal worth a staggering $100 million. It was supposed to be a new era of storytelling. They were the content creators of the future. But by March of 2026, the streaming giant officially pulled the plug. The partnership was terminated. Insiders from within the windowless offices of Netflix described the atmosphere in 4 chilling words: "We are done with them." Why? Because the currency they were trading in royal prestige had become devalued. $100 million is a price tag for access to the British monarchy, not for home movies of a couple complaining in a garden in Montecito. Once the palace doors were locked and the royal family turned their backs, the product Meghan was selling simply ceased to exist. You cannot be an international royal powerhouse if the actual royals will not take your phone calls. Netflix is a business of subscribers, and subscribers eventually tire of a one-note song. The termination was not just about a lack of content. It was a statement that the Sussex brand was no longer worth the bandwidth it occupied. The dominoes continued to fall. Penguin Random House, the legendary publisher that turned a profit on the memoirs of world leaders and icons, allowed a reported $20 million book deal to quietly expire in April of 2026. There was no renewal. There was no announcement of a second blockbuster. Sources from within the publishing house spoke of being financially burned. They had tasted the success of the first book, but they realized that the bridge to the future had been incinerated. There was nothing left to reveal, no more secrets to sell, and certainly no literary merit to sustain a $20 million advance without the heat of a scandal. This is the moment where the commercial reality meets the legal nightmare. Every single one of these contracts, the $100 million from Netflix, the millions from Spotify, the $20 million from the publishers, was built on a singular foundation: the title of Duchess. That title was the unique selling proposition. It was the legal identity that Meghan Markle used to enter these boardrooms. But here is the legal trap that is currently closing. If, as the sources close to Prince William suggest, the title is formally and legally stripped, what happens to those contracts? In the world of high-stakes corporate law, there is a term called material misrepresentation. If you sell a product based on the claim that you are a functioning, titled member of a specific prestigious institution, and that status is revoked because of your own breach of conduct, you are no longer the person who signed the contract. Imagine the lawsuits. Imagine the discovery process. If Meghan Markle is no longer the Duchess of Sussex by royal decree, every dollar she earned using that title becomes a target for litigation. The industry giants she burned are not known for their charity. They will want their pound of flesh. When you lose the title, you do not just lose a word in front of your name, you lose the legal shield that protected your earnings. The Hollywood verdict is in, and it is a unanimous no. The industry has realized that the Sussexes were not creators, they were tourists. They took the money, they took the spotlight, and they failed to deliver the one thing Hollywood demands: consistency. You cannot build a billion-dollar brand on grievances alone. Grievances have a shelf life, and by 2026, that shelf life has reached its expiration date. Meghan Markle now finds herself in the most dangerous position a celebrity can occupy. She is no longer famous for being royal, and she is not talented enough to be famous for being herself. She is in a commercial no man's land. The contracts are gone. The The executives are laughing, and the fraud label has been etched into the history of her American experiment. But as devastating as the financial collapse is, it pales in comparison to the revelation of where her story actually began. Because if you think the Hollywood ending is bad, you haven't seen the truth behind her beginning. We must now turn our attention to the lie that started it all, the 11-year-old activist who never actually existed. Every empire, no matter how vast or modern, requires a foundation myth, a singular, shining moment of origin that justifies its existence and sanctifies its power. For the Duchess of Sussex, that myth was not her marriage into the House of Windsor, nor was it her career in television. It was the story of a girl, 11 years old, who stood alone against the machinery of corporate America and won. It was a story she told at the United Nations to a standing ovation. She told it to world leaders at the One Young World Summit. She told it in the glossy pages of Vanity Fair, and again on the soil of Colombia, as late as August of 2024. It was the story of the Procter & Gamble commercial, the letter to Hillary Clinton, and the birth of a feminist icon. It was the cornerstone of her entire public identity. But as the sun began to set on her commercial credibility in 2026, the cornerstone was not just cracked, it was revealed to be a hollow fabrication. To understand the collapse of Meghan Markle, one must understand that you cannot build a permanent brand on a temporary lie. The story, as she told it for over 20 years, was cinematic in its perfection. A young, socially conscious girl in Los Angeles sees a soap commercial that claims women all over America are fighting greasy pots and pans. Outraged by the sexism, she sits at her desk and pens letters to the most powerful people in the country: the First Lady, a famous news anchor, a civil rights lawyer, and the corporation itself. According to Meghan, the letters worked. The corporation changed the ad. Hillary Clinton wrote back, "A child's voice had altered the course of corporate history." This was the pedigree of deception she used to secure her role as a United Nations women's advocate. It was the proof that she was not just an actress, but a crusader who had been doing the work since childhood. However, when the cold light of investigative journalism was finally applied, the myth dissolved into a mundane reality. Tom Bauer, a man who has made a career out of unearthing the documents that celebrities wish were burned, spent years dissecting this narrative for his 2026 exposé. His findings were devastating. After consulting with advertising historians and reaching out directly to the archives of Procter & Gamble, the truth emerged. There was no evidence that a single 11-year-old girl had forced a multi-billion-dollar shift in marketing strategy. Even more damning was the silence from the office of Hillary Clinton. Despite Meghan's repeated claims that the First Lady had personally sent her a letter of encouragement, fact-checkers at Vanity Fair, during their own rigorous vetting process, could find no proof that such a letter ever existed. They could not verify the story. They could not find the paper trail. And in the world of high-level journalism, when you cannot find the proof, you are looking at a fabrication. But the final, fatal blow did not come from an investigative reporter or a palace official. It came from the only person who was actually in the room when the letters were written, her father, Thomas Markle. In his 2020 documentary, the man who funded her education and supported her dreams for decades finally spoke the truth that Meghan had spent 20 years trying to bury. He did not describe a lone activist fighting the world from her bedroom. He described a class assignment. "I think Meghan was part of a letter-writing campaign of sorts," he said, with the weary honesty of a father who had seen his daughter's life become a script. The story about her single-handedly changing the ad may have been a little embellished. It was a student doing homework. It was a group project in a classroom where dozens of children wrote similar letters as part of a social studies lesson. Meghan had taken a collective school memory and stripped away the other children, the teacher, and the curriculum until only she remained the solitary hero of her own manufactured legend. The weight of this revelation is not merely about a childhood exaggeration. It is about the fundamental integrity of a global brand. When you sell yourself as a global thought leader and a humanitarian activist, your history is your bond. If the very first act of activism you ever claimed is proven to be a strategic embellishment of a fifth-grade homework assignment, then every speech that followed is tainted. Every UN appearance, every summit, every brand partnership built on the empowered girl narrative becomes a house of cards. By 2026, the liability of this story had become so great that her own highly paid PR team began to engage in a silent retreat. During her visit to Colombia, when she once again trotted out the Procter & Gamble anecdote to a fresh audience, her media handlers quietly scrubbed it from the official press bulletins. They did not do this because the story was old news. They did it because they knew it was a lie that had been caught. They knew that in the age of digital archives and relentless fact-checking, the 11-year-old crusader was a ghost that could no longer be conjured. This is the true tragedy of the Sussex operation. It was never about the work. It was about the story of the work. They spent $100 million on a Netflix deal and produced a documentary about themselves. They spent $20 million on a book deal and wrote about themselves. And the foundational story of the woman at the center of it all was a class assignment dressed up as a revolution. When the world realizes that the origin story is a fiction, they begin to look more closely at the current story. They start to ask, if she lied about the letter from Hillary Clinton, what else is she lying about? If she embellished her childhood to get a seat at the United Nations table, what has she embellished to get a seat at the royal table? The Markle effect, which we will examine next, is not just about how she treats her friends, it is about how she treats the truth. Once she has used a story to get what she wants, she discards the reality of it and moves on to the next script. But as Thomas Markle and Tom Bower have proven, the past has a way of refusing to be discarded. The foundation has crumbled, and the woman who wanted to be seen as the ultimate activist is being revealed as the ultimate actress. In the digital age, a person's legacy is often captured not by their awards, but by the language created to describe them. There is a word that has found its way into the Urban Dictionary, a term that has become a chilling shorthand for a specific kind of interpersonal execution. The word is markled. To be markled is to be abandoned, erased, and discarded the very moment you no longer serve a strategic purpose in the ascent of Meghan Markle. It is a verb that describes a shutdown mechanism so cold and so absolute that it has left a trail of broken friendships and terminated careers stretching from the playgrounds of Hollywood to the corridors of Buckingham Palace. To understand the character of a leader, one must look at those who follow them, and more importantly, those who flee from them. Between the years of 2020 and 2026, the operation known as Archewell witnessed a turnover of staff that defies any standard of professional stability. In a mere 6 years, 18 staff members walked out the door. That is an average of 3 departures every single year. These were not junior interns or temp workers. These were seasoned professionals, top-tier advisors, and loyal aides who had spent decades serving the most prestigious institutions in the world. Consider the case of Samantha Cohen. She was a titan of the royal household, a woman who had spent 17 years serving the late Queen Elizabeth with impeccable loyalty. She was assigned to Meghan to navigate the treacherous waters of royal life. She was supposed to stay for 6 months. She stayed for 18, not out of desire, but because the office was in such disarray, they could not find anyone to replace her. When a replacement was finally found and flown to Africa for a royal tour, the new aide lasted less than a fortnight. They quit while on another continent, unable to endure the environment for even 2 weeks. When the Times of London broke the story of the bullying allegations, involving 10 separate staff members who were formally interviewed as part of an independent review, Meghan's response was to call it a calculated smear campaign. But a smear campaign requires a motive. What was the motive of 10 different professionals, all with impeccable records, to risk their careers by speaking out? The palace-funded review was kept private, the results buried in the royal archives, but the message was clear. The institution had failed to protect its staff from a duchess who viewed subordinates as disposable tools rather than human beings. This pattern of disposal, however, did not begin with royal aides. It is a trait that was forged long before she met a prince. Let us look at Nanaki Pretty. This was not a casual acquaintance or a business contact. This was a sister by choice. They met at the age of 2 at the Little Red Schoolhouse in Los Angeles. They were inseparable for over 30 years. They shared sleepovers, road trips, teenage heartbreaks, and the intimate secrets that only a lifelong friend is permitted to hold. Nanaki was the maid of honor at Meghan's first wedding. She held her hand through a divorce. And then, the shutdown mechanism was triggered. When Meghan began her climb toward royal status, 30 years of shared history were deleted in an instant. Nanaki Pretty was not invited to the royal wedding. There was no confrontation, no final conversation, no explanation. The phone simply stopped ringing. Nanaki later described Meghan as calculated and strategic in the way she cultivates circles of friends. Once you are no longer part of the current script, you are erased from the credits. Then there was Jessica Mulroney, the woman who was credited with styling Meghan's royal transition, the woman whose children were in the royal wedding party, the woman who was described by every tabloid in the world as Meghan's most trusted confidant. For 9 years, they were a united front. But in June of 2020, When Mulroney became entangled in a public dispute with an influencer, the Duchess did not stand by her friend. She did not offer a private word of counsel. She cut contact immediately. A source close to the situation noted that the controversy gave Meghan the excuse she was waiting for to sever the tie. Mulroney was not just a friend. She was a liability to the brand, and the brand always comes first. Even Piers Morgan, the man who arguably gave her one of her first major platforms in the British media, found himself markled. After a single evening of drinks and conversation where they got on brilliantly, he never heard from her again. The moment she met Prince Harry later that same night, Morgan went from a useful contact to a non-entity. What we are witnessing is not a series of unfortunate falling outs. It is a psychological strategy. To Meghan Markle, people are like rungs on a ladder. You step on them to reach a higher elevation, and once your foot is firmly planted on the next level, the rung below you is forgotten. The problem with this strategy, however, is that a ladder without rungs is just a vertical drop. By 2026, she has discarded so many people, burned so many bridges, and markled so many allies that she stands alone on a very high, very fragile platform. The 18 staff members who left, the childhood friends who were ghosted, the stylists who were abandoned, they are no longer just names in a tabloid. They are witnesses to a pattern of behavior that the British monarchy is now using to build its final case. When you treat the world as a stage, and the people in it as props, you eventually find yourself in an empty theater. As we move into the final legal fallout, we will see how this coldness toward individuals has translated into a fatal miscalculation against an institution that has survived for 1,000 years. The shutdown mechanism is about to be turned on its creator. In the hallowed halls of international law and the sterile boardrooms of multinational corporations, there is no room for sentiment, no patience for PR spin, and no mercy for those who fail to read the fine print. While the public has been distracted by the soap opera of royal feuds and Netflix documentaries, a much more dangerous reality has been quietly tightening its grip around the Sussex operation. It is a reality built not on hurt feelings, but on a cold, clinical legal principle known as material misrepresentation. And as we stand in 2026, this principle is the trap that Meghan Markle has spent 5 years inadvertently setting for herself. To understand the magnitude of the financial catastrophe that now looms, one must understand what a royal title actually is in a commercial context. It is not merely a polite way to address someone, it is a legal identity. When Meghan Markle signed her name to contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, she did not sign as a private citizen from Los Angeles. She signed as the Duchess of Sussex. That title was the consideration, the value that she brought to the table. It was the guarantee of a certain status, a certain level of access, and a specific relationship with the British Crown. But what happens when that status is proven to be a violation of a prior legal agreement? What happens when the very title used to secure those millions is revealed to be a house of cards? The pivot point was the Instagram incident in April. By allowing the style, "Your Royal Highness," to be broadcast to millions for a commercial audience, Meghan did more than just break a promise to a grandmother. She committed a documented breach of the Sandringham Agreement. That agreement, signed in 2020, was a restrictive covenant. It explicitly forbade the commercial use of the HRH style. In the eyes of the law, every contract she signed after 2020 was predicated on her being in good standing with the British monarchy. By violating the terms of her exit, she effectively rendered her royal status a liability rather than an asset. When a corporation like Netflix or a giant like Spotify pays $100 million or $20 million for a partnership, they are paying for a brand that is legitimate. If that brand is later found to be built on a breach of contract with the sovereign of a nation, the lawyers for those corporations do not simply walk away. They look for the exit clause. They look for material misrepresentation. This is the legal term for when one party provides false or misleading information that is central to the deal. If Meghan sold herself as a duchess who had the right to operate in the royal sphere, while simultaneously violating the legal restrictions placed upon her by the crown, she opened the door for every partner she has ever had to sue for a total clawback of funds. This is the nightmare scenario that no amount of jam selling in California can fix. Consider the As Ever brand, or the American Riviera Orchard. These businesses are not built on the quality of the product, they are built on the prestige of the Sussex name. But as the King's Council and the parliamentary committees move closer to a formal removal of the titles, the legal foundation of these businesses begins to dissolve. If the title of Duchess is stripped by an act of Parliament or a letters patent, Meghan Markle does not simply become a former royal. In the eyes of contract law, she becomes an individual who sold a product herself under a title she no longer possessed the legal right to use for profit. The financial fallout of such a move would be total. We are talking about the potential for retroactive litigation. If Netflix can prove that their $100 million investment was based on a royal identity that Meghan was actively sabotaging through her breaches of the Sandringham Agreement, they could seek to recover every cent that hasn't already been spent. They could claim that the product they bought was defective from the moment of its inception. In 2026, as the industry insiders describe being done with them, this is not just a theory. It is a strategy for loss mitigation. The frauds label used by Spotify executives was not just an insult. It was a shot across the bow, a signal that the corporate world is ready to argue that they were sold a bill of goods. Unlike Harry, Meghan has no safety net in the law. This is the distinction that will ultimately define the end of this era. Prince Harry was born a prince. He is a prince by blood, by birth, and by the indelible ink of history. Even if every title is stripped, he remains the son of the king. He has a floor. Meghan Markle, however, was born a private citizen. Her title is a courtesy title, a gift granted through marriage by the royal prerogative. It is a temporary legal status. If that status is revoked, she has no birthright to fall back on. She returns to the legal state of Meghan Mountbatten Windsor, a name that holds zero weight in a multi-million-dollar production contract. The trap is now closed. Every time she corrected a celebrity on camera to use her title, every time she sent a gift basket embossed with a crown she agreed not to use for commerce, she was creating a digital trail of evidence. She was documenting her own material misrepresentation. The lawyers for the crown are patient, and the lawyers for Hollywood are ruthless. By 2026, they have found common ground. Prince William's red line is not just about family loyalty. It is about the protection of the crown as a trademark. If the monarchy allows its titles to be used as mere marketing tools for lifestyle brands and podcasts, the value of the monarchy itself is diminished. To save the institution, William must destroy the commercial viability of the Sussex brand. And he will do it not with a sword, but with a pen by ensuring that the title Meghan Markle values so much becomes the very thing that bankrupts her. As we look at the numbers, the 100 million lost, the 20 million expired, the millions in potential litigation, we see the final result of a 5-year gamble. She thought she was bigger than the institution. She thought she could use the title as a shield while using it as a sword. But in the end, the law is the only thing that matters. And the law says that when the Duchess disappears, the debt remains. The As Ever brand is about to face the forever consequences of a royal purge. We move now to the final move on the chessboard, the moment where the Prince of Wales becomes the king of the fallout. The silence of the crown is not the silence of weakness. It is the silence of an institution that has outlived every critic, every rebel, and every revolution for over 1,000 years. Prince William has spent his entire life preparing for a single role, the defense of the realm. To him, the monarchy is not a platform for self-expression or a vehicle for personal enrichment. It is a sacred trust. And in 2026, that trust was finally invoked to deliver the ultimate blow. The red line has been crossed, the crown has stopped waiting, and the era of the Sussex experiment has been officially brought to an end. For 5 years, the world watched a bizarre spectacle of a duchess attempting to sell the prestige of a 1,000-year-old throne from a villa in California. But as we have seen, the foundations were built on sand. The $100 million deals have evaporated. The Hollywood executives have walked away, branding them with the one word that no PR team can erase: frauds. The origin story of the 11-year-old activist has been unmasked as a school assignment. The network of friends has been markled, until there is no one left to answer the phone. Now, the final move on the chessboard belongs to the king. The process of stripping a royal title is not a matter of petty revenge. It is a clinical removal of a brand that has become a liability to the state. When the letters patent are issued and the parliamentary acts are finalized, Meghan Markle will face a reality she has spent her entire adult life trying to avoid. She will not be a diminished duchess. She will not be a former royal. She will be Meghan Mountbatten Windsor. I want you to really consider the weight of that name. For Meghan, that name is a commercial death sentence. Unlike Harry, who was born a prince and will always be the son of a king, Meghan has no inherent royal blood. Her status was a gift, a courtesy granted by a sovereign she publicly disparaged. When that gift is reclaimed, the magic disappears. You cannot sell jam, lifestyle products, or thought leadership under the name Meghan Mountbatten Windsor. That name does not open the doors of the United Nations. It does not secure private jets or front row seats at global summits. It is just a name. The ultimate irony is that the shutdown mechanism Meghan used so effectively on her childhood friends and her own father has finally been turned against her. The monarchy has decided to apply its own cold, strategic silence. No more negotiations. No more invitations to the balcony. No more diplomatic protection. Just the cold, hard reality of a closed door. The institution has decided that she is no longer useful to the story of the British people. She has been markled by the very crown she thought she could manipulate. As this empire of grievances collapses, we are left with a single, haunting question. If the very first story she ever told the world, the story of the 11-year-old girl who changed corporate America, was an embellishment, then what else in that carefully curated biography is a fiction? If the foundation was a lie, then the entire structure was destined to fall. Meghan Markle wanted to modernize the monarchy, but she forgot that the monarchy survives because it is ancient, not because it is trendy. She tried to turn a crown into a logo, and in doing so, she lost both. As the legal fallout begins and the financial debts mount, the woman who once stood on the world stage as a duchess now stands alone in a house built on stories that no one believes anymore. Prince William's message to the world is clear. The crown is about service, not merchandise. You can walk away from the duty, but you cannot take the dignity with you. In 2026, the ledger has been balanced. The Sussex brand is bankrupt, the titles are in the shredder, and the truth has finally caught up with the script. So, I ask you, the viewer, as you look back on this 5-year saga, what do you think is the burra? Was it the activism? Quote, was it the Your Royal Highness status she clung to while fleeing the country? Or was it the belief that a Hollywood actress could ever outplay 1,000 years of tradition? Drop your theory in the comments. I am asking seriously, because if the origin story could not survive a simple fact check by Vanity Fair, then what exactly is the Duchess of Sussex's entire identity actually built on? The answer to that question is the only thing that remains of her legacy. The As Ever brand has reached its never again moment. The king has spoken. The case is closed. The shutdown is total.